I love the Final Fantasy series, so when I decided to get 100% on every mainline game, I knew I would be in for a good time. I knew with 16 mainline entries in the series that there would be plenty of variety to come, but I did not realize how much change there would be by the second game already. Today we're going to be taking a retrospective look at Final Fantasy II and seeing just how much has changed since the first game. I'm Metasly, and this is my review of Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy I is a well-known classic for good reason. It not only spawned a sprawling series that's still running to this day, but the original entry itself is a masterpiece of its time. I love Final Fantasy I and have beaten it multiple times, and in my mind it is one of the cornerstones of the series that you can point a series newcomer to in order to give them an idea of what the series is all about. As the Final Fantasy series moved to Final Fantasy II, however, there were some pretty drastic changes made to the overall formula of the game. Today we're going to take a look at some of these changes as compared to Final Fantasy I, as well as review Final Fantasy II as a whole. The changes start before you even actually start playing the game. In Final Fantasy I, you would start by choosing classes and names for your 4 party members. These classes are absolutely iconic even to this day. I love the way the classes work in Final Fantasy I. What class you choose will determine which weapons and armor each character can use, as well as which magic spells are available to them. Warriors can use heavy equipment and armor, monks are meant to be played as unarmed fighters, and thieves are supposed to be more nimble and flee from battle more easily. The mages are really interesting in that the color of the mage you choose determines what type of magic you can use. White mages use white or healing magic, and black mages use black or offensive magic, while red mages can use both types of magic but not at a high level. Later on in the game, these unique classes get even cooler and get class upgrades, making them more powerful and changing their character sprites in the game. Final Fantasy II does away with all of this though, in favor of having unique characters rather than choosing classes. You can rename the characters, but they will still have the same stats. This change became the norm in most of the later Final Fantasy games, which I think turned out really well since it gave us characters like Cloud Strife and Wakka. I am glad, however, that they decided eventually to give each unique character their own weapons again, such as Cloud's Buster Sword and Wakka's Blitzball. Not only did the character types change from Final Fantasy I to Final Fantasy II, but so did the layout of the entire party. In Final Fantasy I, you could choose one of 4 positions for each party member, and the closer to the number 1 spot the character was, the more likely they were to get hit. In FF2, however, the party isn't arranged in a hierarchy, but rather in rows. The front row takes more damage and deals more melee damage, and the back row takes less damage and deals more magic or range damage. This is a small change that doesn't make a ton of difference, but it kind of takes away your ability to put a character in the number 1 spot and let them play as the tank. One other thing of note regarding the party in FF2 is that your 4th party member constantly changes throughout the game. As the story progresses, different characters will join or leave your party, meaning you get to play as many different characters, which is cool, but most of them honestly suck and were just there as a novelty and really didn't add much utility in battle. The change in the way the characters operate in Final Fantasy II may not be optimal compared to newer games in the series, but it definitely changes the feel of the game. The stories in Final Fantasy I and II are pretty simple. I'm not going to give too many spoilers here, but you're not going to find a ton of depth in either game. That being said, FF2's addition of unique characters makes the game feel more personable. This may seem like a subtle artistic change, but there are several changes to the way you interact with the story that distinctly separate Final Fantasy I and II. The most obvious of these changes is the introduction of key terms. In order to progress in the story, you have to talk to certain NPCs and learn key terms that pop up. Once you learn these key terms, you can then ask other NPCs about them and progress the story or get bits of lore. I personally think this is a cool addition and it adds to the game by making it more personal. Having unique characters who learn from the dialogue and then use that information from their memory makes FF2 feel more like you are the main character, as opposed to FF1, which feels to me more like an ancient story that you're observing in the 3rd person. Obviously, later games in the series capture that personal feeling more than FF2, but this is the first game in the series to attempt it, and an important step leading to what we know today. There are even characters that still survive to this day that started out with their first appearance in FF2, such as Behemoth, Cid, and the Chocobo. While it definitely didn't do everything perfectly, this game did a lot of things that made it stand out from its predecessor. Another change that didn't quite pan out the way it was intended was the magic system. As I mentioned before, there were set spells in FF1 for white and black magic, and while there is still white and black magic in FF2, it is utilized much differently. In Final Fantasy I, you could only use spells with mages or wizards, and only mages or wizards of the right color at that. In this game, however, any character can use any spell. Each of the characters have slightly different stats, which in theory should push you to use different spells with different characters, but as we'll get to later, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. The next problem with the magic system in this game is the way you progress to more powerful spells. In Final Fantasy I, you would buy different upgraded levels of each spell, such as Fire, then Fyra, then Firaga as levels 1, 2, and 3 of fire spells. In Final Fantasy II, however, you have to use each spell specifically to level it, so as in our example of the fire spell, you have to keep using fire to progress it from level 1 to 2 and so on. This may not sound bad in theory since you only have to buy the spell one time, but it doesn't really pan out so well in the game. You have to constantly use each individual spell to level it, which can be a bit tedious and annoying, and it takes forever to level any one certain spell unless you almost exclusively use that spell. Funnily enough, the game fixes its own problem in a weird way though, because most spells in the game are practically useless. I only ever found about 4 spells in the game to be practical and consistently useful, which is pretty lame, but it makes it easier to level the ones you actually want to use if you don't waste time leveling spells that aren't even very good at high levels. If it weren't for the small handful of useful spells, the entire magic system would be completely useless because physical attacks are way more effective in this game. There are a couple of spots in the game with really tough enemies that are hard to beat purely with physical attacks, but even in those situations, the only spell that I found really useful is Berserk, which boosts your physical attack. These situations, along with using healing spells, are pretty much the only times magic is useful, and I found that the best, easiest, and quickest strategy is just to turn on auto battle and use physical attacks with everyone, and then just use Berserk for the handful of enemies that are tough enough to need it. Along with magic being of very little consequence, status ailments aren't really a big deal in this game either. There are technically quite a few status ailments in the game, but they happen so infrequently and have such a small effect that I found myself forgetting that they were even there and not needing to try to prevent them. Poison, for example, is a huge deal in Final Fantasy I because you remain poisoned even after battle and take damage with every step until you cure yourself. In Final Fantasy II, however, the poison effect ends as soon as battle is over and you don't have to worry about carrying around a ton of antidotes everywhere you go. There technically is a venom status effect that is basically the same as poison from FF1, but it happens so infrequently that it isn't really that big a deal. As you can see, Final Fantasy II is full of new ideas, some of which didn't work very well, but despite all of the shortcomings, I still think the game is worth playing. Even though the characters and story are simple, I still found myself getting attached. The combat may not be the most balanced or engaging, but it's not so bad that it's unplayable, and if you're a fan of the Final Fantasy series and really want to see how the series progressed in the early days, you may want to give FF2 a shot. It's not perfect and kind of rough around the edges by today's standards, but it will always have its place in history, paving the way for the series that we still love today. What are your guys' thoughts on Final Fantasy II? Have you played it? If you have, let me know in the comments if you agree with my assessment, and if you haven't played it, let me know if this was helpful for you. I hope you guys will give the game a shot, and if you want more Final Fantasy content, I've got tons on my channel for you to check out along with other RPG content, retro game collecting content. Check it out if that's something you're interested in, and consider hitting the subscribe button if you want to stay caught up on all my future videos. Thank you guys for watching, thank you for your support, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.